Good afternoon. Stephen Kent Mirasu of Wine Saves Lives with you, coming to you from my backyard, side yard. Practically all wines that you find stores at cellar of winery are blended wines. When we think about blended wines, usually we're referring to or thinking about wines that are X percent of Cabernet Sauvignon, Y percent of Cabernet Franc, Z percent of Merlot, those kinds of things, where you're bringing a bunch of different varieties together to try to create a cohesive blend, something that is greater than the sum of its parts, gives you a synergistic experience. But the reality is, at least on the finer wine side of things, as winemakers, we're always looking at the smallest denominator of wine, which is usually a barrique, French name for a regular barrel that if you've been to wineries, you've seen them on TV. There are 59 to 60 gallons worth of wine, and the barrels are being used to add wood flavoring, wood aroma, or if they're neutral oak, like a lot of the wood that we use at the Stephen Kent Winery, they're being used to help kind of sand off the rougher corners, the rougher acidic and tannic corners that you get from young wine. Micro-oxygenation, micro-oxidation happens as air travels through the pores of the barrel inside to outside and vice versa. And when you take the bung off to top a barrel, you get a big influx of air into the barrel, and oxygen in various forms and various compounds within the barrel will help to create that softening effect on the wine, adding a sense of maturity, a sense of roundness, a sense of maybe more complexity to the wine as well, certainly from a textural standpoint. Blending is what allows winemakers to take a disparate number of inputs, different flavors, different aromas, different textures, and create something that ends up being beautiful, something that ends up being, again, more than the sum of its parts. We make a wine called Lineage, which is a Bordeaux blend, a blend of Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, sometimes Petit Verdot, sometimes Malbec. Those wines are wonderfully complicated to make because there's a lot of different flavor inputs, a lot of different textural factors in the individual wines that, when put together, give you something that we hope anyway is beautiful and connects with you as a drinker emotionally. We're releasing a new wine in a couple of days. It's the Premier Cabernet from the Stephen Kent Winery right here. And this wine is 100% Cabernet, but it is Cabernet from a couple of different vineyards. The Premier has always been our expression of the Livermore Valley. It's always been an expression of what is quintessentially Livermore Valley-ish about this wine. We make a lot of single vineyard wines too. And those single vineyard wines, as winemakers, we're always trying to create a sense that Gilmette Vineyard or the Home Ranch Vineyard or Sockau Vineyard are in and of themselves in that wine. That wine is supposed to be as pure an expression of a place and a time as possible. The Premier, on the other hand, is more about the overall view of what Livermore is and what Livermore provides. In my opinion, always has been, always will be, world-class growing area for Cabernet Sauvignon. Maybe even a better place for Cabernet Franc, but that's for a different video. The Premier in 2020 is different than any other Premier we've ever made. We started making Premier in 2009. This is our first wine from the Santa Cruz Mountains, a vineyard called Bates Ranch, which I'll get into in a different video in great depth because it was one of the more magical places that I've ever been, whether I was a winemaker or not. There's something exhilarating and compelling about this place that we'll talk about later. 2020 in Livermore, huge problem with fires. Livermore isn't generally a place where the fires are raging, but a place where a lot of smoke congregates. It serves kind of as a funnel to the Central Valley. We got smoke from the SCU complex fire in the Santa Cruz Mountains. In 2020, we also had smoke coming south from Napa Valley in 2020. So practically all of the fruit, all of the wine that we made from the Livermore Valley in 20, we dumped down the drain, figuratively. We sold it off to a company that will use it to create industrial alcohol or distill it for the base for cleaning fluid or what have you. Hard to spend a year doing something, 3 years actually doing something, making the wine, aging the wine, not to even talk about the expensive new barrels and fruit and crushing and all that kind of stuff. But coincidentally enough, we were sourcing fruit from the Santa Cruz Mountains and from Napa Valley the same year. Both of those wines came out absolutely beautifully. And so for 1 year, the premier Cabernet from the Stephen Kent Winery will be Santa Cruz Mountain Cab and not Livermore Valley. Santa Cruz Mountains is one of the legendary places for wine in California. If you've ever been to Mount Eden Winery in just above the town of Saratoga, about 2,400 feet, 2,600 feet above the valley floor, it's one of the few places in the world where you can actually grow world-class Pinot, Chard, and Cabernet in the same place. Propitiously located above the fog line, cold in the morning, you get some sun in the evening, in the afternoon, and you get these amazing wines that are ripe at lower sugar levels that are iconic. Same with Ridge in Cupertino, a little further north of Mount Eden. Bates Ranch, located in the southeast corner of the appellation, about 10 miles west of Morgan Hill, I think actually in the town of Gilroy, if you're looking at the address, produces wines that are like a lot of other Santa Cruz Mountain areas, wines with darker fruit than you tend to get in Napa and Livermore, wines that have more acid, wines that have a drive to them and a beauty to them that's different. It's a tougher beauty in a way. It's a beauty that doesn't show itself all at one moment. It's a beauty that requires patience. It's a beauty that it sort of reminds me, it comes to my mind right now. You see a painting by Georges Seurat, and he's the pointillist painter from the late 1800s, French, where if you're really, really close, it's just a series of dots. And as you walk away from the painting, this beautiful view, this complete, gorgeous view of folks walking along a river comes into focus. That's kind of what Santa Cruz Mountains is, it seems to me. That at first, when the wines are really young, they are somewhat disparate. You know, there's an acid element here, and there's a tannin element over here. There's dark fruit. There's an earthiness, aromatically, fall leaves, forest floor kinds of notes that take quite a while to actually coalesce into this gorgeous, pure, whole image. And these wines are incredibly compelling to me because of that, because they don't show everything at once, that they require you to have a little bit of imagination and require you to like something's a little bit more subtle, perhaps. Livermore, Napa, warmer growing areas tend to produce riper fruit, rounder, and depending upon when you pick things, you can have very high pHs that make the wines feel in your mouth kind of like canned melted chocolate or whatever, which a lot of people like. A style that I think has its drawbacks, has its challenges, but certainly immediate deliciousness is not one of those challenges. That's something I think the Santa Cruz Mountains tends to have more of. So we produced this wine, the Premier, out of 3 separate subblocks of Cabernet from Bates Ranch, little bits of vineyard, 3 or 4 acres in each of 200 feet above sea level, 800 feet above sea level, and 1,200 feet above sea level, planted at different times, and put all of these blocks together. Thought at one point about doing them separately, but decided ultimately that the blend together was more compelling a wine. And then we added 5% of Napa Valley Cabernet that provided a little bit of a back end tannin lift, a little bit of a structure, I think, on the back end with all this gorgeous, dark, segmented fruit and earthiness kind of coming from entry through mid palate, was bolstered and supported by this in its youth, in wine right now anyway, a wall of tannin, and extremely happy about how this wine is tasting now, and extraordinarily excited about tasting this wine 10 years from now, when I think that's going to start to be at its optimum. So I'm thinking about blending, thinking about how do we create a shape in the wine drinker's mouth from this wine that's going to highlight that great acidity, highlight that amazing fruit with a structural component, the tannin, that will help to reward aging, but also gives the wine an anchoring point right now in its youth. And I think that the Napa Valley Cabernet was what allowed us to do that. And typically what we would do is we'd create sort of the Santa Cruz base first, and then we start playing around with percentages. We'll do a bunch of different mock blends of 4% of Napa Cab, 5%, 10%, 3%, whatever, until we get to a point where over time, after a bunch of blind tastings with these mock blends, we consistently land on, hey, that's the one that gives us this thing. And that's what happened for us. That's what happened for us in 2020. This wine is going to be released in the first week of May. It's available at the winery. We didn't make a lot of it, only about 150 cases or so. But the blending aspect of this was exciting, and it was fun to do a couple different appellations in the blend, to give us what it is we were looking for, to make a lemonade out of a bunch of really smoky and ashy lemons. We hope you have a chance to try this wine. I think it's going to be historically important for Stephen Kent Winery, because it helps to bring, it gives us as winemakers an opportunity of seeing what we do with fruit that we have loved, that other people have made into amazing wines. And it gives us an opportunity also to showcase those differences and similarities with Livermore Valley, which is our home, and a region that is criminally misunderstood by a lot of wine critics, and woefully underappreciated by a lot of wine lovers. So this gives us an opportunity of showcasing Livermore Valley and the Santa Cruz Mountains in a way that does benefit to both of them. Hope you have a chance to try the wines. Thanks for subscribing to Wine Saves Lives. And if you're not a subscriber yet, please join us. You get a lot more of these kinds of deeper dives into why we make decisions that we make in the cellar, and why they're important if you love wine. Cheers. See you soon.